Coming up on this Wednesday edition of Daybreak, following up on her pledge to reform the government, President Park proposes a new Deputy Prime Minister position to better coordinate the government's education, social and culture-related policies. At least 21 people have been killed in a fire at a nursing home in southern Korea. Most of the patients at the facility were elderly and had mobility issues. Plus, a state-run think tank cuts this year's economic growth outlook for Korea to 3.7% due to sluggish domestic consumption, further dented by the Sewol-ho ferry disaster. Daybreak begins now. Hello and thanks for joining us. To our viewers around the world, it's 6 a.m. on Wednesday, May 28th. Here in Seoul, I'm Mark Broom and you're tuned in to Daybreak. Our top story this morning, President Park Geun-hye is moving to fulfill her recently pledged government reforms in the aftermath of the Sewol-ho ferry disaster. She has proposed a new Deputy Prime Minister to look after education, social and cultural issues, and has announced a complete overhaul of the Security Ministry. Our Choi You-sun starts us off.
President Park says there should be a new Deputy Prime Minister in charge of policy making on non-economic issues related to education, social and cultural affairs. At a cabinet meeting Tuesday, the president said the current deputy and finance minister will continue to look after economic policies, while the head of the National Security Office handles Korea's foreign, defense and security issues. She then said the new deputy should be given the task of overseeing the remaining issues, mainly related to education, society and culture, something the president says is needed to increase efficiency and responsibility in policy making. Meanwhile, the education minister is expected to take on the role of the new deputy. Officials at the presidential office say the troika system, with the prime minister in charge of law and order, public sector reforms and public safety alongside the two deputies, reflects the president transferring more responsibilities to the executive branch. The top office added that the Ministry of Security and Public Administration, which came under fire for its lax response to the recent ferry accident, will be renamed and its safety and personnel management roles removed. The ministry, however, will retain its tasks of managing government structure and other administrative affairs. Its current safety management responsibility will be transferred to the new Safety Ministry and personnel management to the new Personnel Ministry, both under the Prime Minister's office. The presidential office is expected to unveil a more detailed government restructuring plan on Wednesday, which it hopes passes Parliament as soon as possible. Choi You-sun, Arirang News.
Turning now to the latest on the search for those believed most responsible for last month's Sewol-ho ferry disaster. Korea's Justice Ministry says Interpol has arrested a daughter of Yoo Byung-an, the fugitive owner of the ferry operator. She was at a Paris apartment when she was taken into custody on Tuesday. She had been on Interpol's most wanted list and had had her passport revoked by Korean authorities. She had ignored several summons for questioning and faces allegations of embezzlement. Yoo's daughter will be flown back to Korea soon. The search goes on for Yoo Byung-an and his other children who are thought to be on the run. Turning now to inter-Korean relations, and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has called for revived dialogue in order to deal with North Korea's nuclear problem. Speaking at the Chinese embassy in Seoul on Tuesday and wrapping up his two-day visit to South Korea, Wang emphasized the need for combined efforts by neighboring countries to restart the Sixparty denuclearization talks. And there's been a flurry of diplomatic activity in recent months to jumpstart those talks, the long-stalled Six-party nuclear talks on North Korea's denuclearization. North Korea, however, is refusing to make any concessions on its nuclear program. Our Hwang Sang-yi sat down with Victor Cha, Korea Chair for the Center of Strategic and International Studies, and she asked him whether he thought the talks would resume anytime soon.
Bringing back North Korea to the negotiating table could take some time. In an interview with Arirang News on Tuesday, Victor Cha, Korea chair for the Center for Strategic and International Studies, said the United States has shown some flexibility, but that its offer remains unanswered.
But I think what the United States is saying is that, look, if you show you're willing to stop testing and allow inspectors back in, then the U.S. is willing to come back to negotiations. It's a sign of flexibility on the part of the United States to keep the negotiations alive. But the North Koreans don't seem to be interested in that right now.
While some view the so-called six-party talks as an old formula, the visiting expert said the multilateral framework is still a valid way to denuclearize Pyongyang. The six-party talks involving the two Koreas, the United States, China, Japan, and Russia, broke down in December 2008.
The U.S.-North Korea bilateral is important because North Korea wants to talk to the United States. But the six-party format is also important because it ensures that whatever agreements are made between the U.S. and North Korea are reaffirmed in the six-party context to ensure that, in particular, the North Koreans comply with the agreements.
Dr. Cha says China could take a stronger role by linking North Korea's economic aid to its denuclearization, but that it's not ready to take that risk.
If they cut off things too severely, they could collapse the regime. And right now, at least their calculation is that that is not worth the risk, even though it means a slowly developing nuclear program.
And the remaining five parties have problems of their own. For instance, South Korea and Japan are at odds over historical issues. Dr. Cha says the friction will affect the ability to coordinate effectively on North Korea, which is why the two neighbors both need to take action.
I certainly think that Japan should issue an apology for the comfort women. But if the Japanese issue an apology, I think the South Koreans have to be ready to accept an apology.
Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
Now, another disaster has struck Korea. At least 21 people have been killed in a fire at a nursing home in southern Korea. The blaze broke out shortly past midnight on Wednesday at the Jangsong Hospital in Jeollanam-do province. Most of the victims are said to be in their 70s, 80s and 90s, as the hospital specialized in taking care of senior citizens with chronic health conditions. 7 people are receiving medical treatment, but the death toll is likely to go up, as 6 are said to be in a serious condition. Firefighters say the fire was brought under control within half an hour, but many died or were affected from inhaling smoke. There was reportedly only one nurse on duty for the ward that was in charge of taking care of elderly stroke and dementia patients. Local authorities are still determining the exact cause of the fire.
We start before the sun rises to bring you the latest stories out of Korea. We also lead the way with important global coverage. Stay on the pulse of what is happening with Daybreak.
Korea and the United Arab Emirates will work together in tapping into other nuclear energy markets, including Saudi Arabia's. Korea's Trade Minister Yoon Sang-jik said Tuesday the two countries are not far away from signing a memorandum of understanding on this issue. Yoon added the leaders of Seoul and Abu Dhabi reached an agreement in principle during President Park Geun-hye's recent trip to the region, where Korea's technology is being used to build nuclear power plants. Korea will also likely be able to seal the deal on becoming the main operator for the next 6 decades of the nuclear reactors currently under construction. The contract will likely be worth some $20 billion. Korea's state-run economic policy think tank has lowered its economic outlook for this year to 3.7%. As our Kwon So-ah reports, last month's tragic Sewol-ho ferry disaster played a key role in the downward revision.
A drop in private consumption is the main culprit that brought down the Korea Development Institute's growth forecast this year. This comes as consumers have been spending less since the Sewol-ho ferry disaster last month. Although the think tank did not see this as a long-term risk, the slow consumption pulled down the country's 2014 economic growth forecast to 3.7%. Number-wise, it's the same figure from its last projection. But given its recent adjustment in its GDP calculation, this reflects a drop of 0.2 percentage points. Not only dull consumption, but also growth forecasts in facility investment and spending in the construction were revised down. And against this backdrop, the KDI added that the country needs to allow a slight fiscal deficit for now, given the consumption slowdown, and called on the Bank of Korea to hold the key rate, saying it may be too premature to tighten the money flow. And it looks like worries over the ferry disaster's impact on domestic spending are resonating in the central bank as well. The May minutes from the Bank of Korea show some committee members did raise views that the ferry disaster may crimp spending and investment in the country. 권소아, Arirang News.
Now, a growing number of Korean women in their 30s are continuing on with their work life, with their careers, with their number in the workforce reaching a record high last year. Shin Se-min has this report.
More Korean women are jumping in the workforce. The labor participation rate of women in their 30s hit its highest rate on record last year, albeit with minor growth. According to Statistics Korea, the percentage of women between the ages of 30 and 39 with jobs was 57% in 2013. The numbers in the age bracket have been growing, but only by about 1 percentage point each year since 2009, with the exception of 2008 when the global financial crisis hit. Experts mainly attribute the growth of women in the workforce to more women receiving higher education and putting off marriage. While the labor participation rate has been on a steady rise, Korea still lags far behind when compared to other countries.
Among the OECD nations, Korea is one of the countries on the bottom of the list when it comes to the female labor participation rate. For instance, in 2012, the OECD average was in the low 70% range, while Korea was in the 50% range.
And while government measures such as encouraging companies to provide more flexible working hours for women have helped raise the participation rate of Korean women, Kang added that the private sector needed to do more. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Now, Korea's main gateway, Incheon International Airport, has ranked the world's best airport for nearly a decade now, but it's falling short in one area, its goal of becoming a so-called hub airport. Fewer international travelers are passing through Incheon on their way to other destinations. Our Connie Kim has the details.
There are concerns Incheon International Airport may lose its reputation as a regional aviation hub. The number of passengers making international transfers at Korea's largest airport has been on the decline in recent months. In April, 525,000 people stopped over in Korea on their way to other destinations, a significant drop from just 8 months earlier. It's a disconcerting trend for an airport like Incheon that aspires to be a so-called hub airport. Compared to others that boast that title like Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport, Germany's Frankfurt Airport, and Singapore Changi Airport, Incheon lags far behind with a transfer rate at 17% this year, placing it outside the global top 10. The Korean daily Joseonilbo attributes the decline to fewer Japanese and Chinese passengers passing through the airport. Experts say Incheon International Airport needs to increase the supply of international flight transfers in order to increase its transfer passengers.
Hong Kong and Singapore have risen as hub airports because of convenient business travel schedules and low air freight charges. Korea needs to actively bring in more diverse airlines from abroad to increase supply to passengers.
Lee also added that establishing tourist attractions would also help. Although Incheon International Airport has topped the airport service quality assessment for 9 consecutive years, it has a number of hurdles to scale before it can call itself one of the world's hub airports. Connie Kim, Arirang News, Incheon.
The so-called creative economy has been touted as the next growth model that is going to transform Korea over the coming years and decades. With this in mind, our Park Geun-hye reports on the government's plans to nurture the next generation of creative thinkers.
26-year-old Lee Jun-min and his classmates have developed a program for a simple manual game.
We wanted to create a game that requires interactive body movements like when we played with shadows as children.
And university student Shin Jae-won has been involved in a storytelling business project.
We realize the storytelling industry's immense possible influence on the creative economy, as it can provide an endless amount of new items.
They are some of Korea's young pioneers with creative minds, the fuel that runs the country's creative economy. According to a definition by the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, at the heart of any creative economy is the contents industry, which spans diverse sectors like film, music, and gaming. But these sectors are not new to Korea, which has the world's 7th biggest media entertainment industry, raking in some $45 billion in 2012. The nation's contents industry in total logged an annual revenue of nearly $90 billion last year, up more than 4% on year. Zeroing in on its great potential for growth, the government aims to increase its annual revenue further to nearly $120 billion by 2017. As one of many efforts to stimulate the nation's creativity, the first Content Korea Lab, a free public center equipped with diverse facilities like recording studios and video editing rooms, opened in Seoul.
Content Korea Lab is where anyone with creative ideas can gather and fuse their minds with others to initiate new projects.
The Culture Ministry plans to open 10 more centers nationwide by 2017 to act as hubs for inspiring and cultivating even greater creativity for the future. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Time now for a look through the international headlines we're following this morning. For that, we turn to our Eunice Kim standing by at the news center. Good morning, Eunice.
And good morning to you, Mark. Just about a couple hours ago, U.S. President Barack Obama announced plans to formally end America's combat mission in Afghanistan by the end of this year, bringing the curtains down on more than a decade of war. U.S. troops were sent to Afghanistan within a month of September 11th, 2001, and in the course of time, President Obama said al-Qaeda has been significantly weakened and Osama bin Laden eliminated. The timeline calls for most of the 32,000 troops to be withdrawn, leaving behind just 9,800 soldiers to support Afghan troops in training and counterterrorism efforts. By the end of 2015, less than 1,000 American boots will remain in Kabul and Bagram airfield. The plan is contingent upon approval by the Afghan government. And in Ukraine, dozens of pro-Russian rebels were killed in the fiercest battle yet between separatists and Kiev's forces that began as President-elect Petro Poroshenko was giving his victory speech early Monday, local time. A representative from the so-called Donetsk People's Republic told Reuters more than 50 rebels were dead in the fight near Ukraine's second-largest airport in Donetsk. Bodies were still being recovered as corpses were stacked in a morgue, several missing limbs. Meanwhile, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov called on Kiev to stop the bloodshed with the immediate halt of military action, adding that Moscow was ready for direct talks with Petro Poroshenko, Ukraine's newly elected president. And Thailand's military junta has detained former education minister Jaturon Chaisang, who emerged from hiding Tuesday to criticize the country's current military rule. In a surprise news conference at the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand, he said a coup d'etat was not the solution to the problems of Thai society. He called for elections, warning of a potential disaster should resistance to the coup grow. He was apprehended shortly after that. Chaisang was the first member of the ousted government to make a public appearance. The junta has summoned and detained more than 200 people, including academics and journalists, since assuming power last Thursday. And finally, the Malaysian government has released the raw transmission satellite data used to determine the flight path of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 that remains missing after disappearing nearly 3 months ago. The Inmarsat data gave further evidence that the plane crashed into the Indian Ocean after detouring south and running out of fuel. Officials say the search could take up to a year, with questions being raised about how to proceed and how to split the growing search costs.
And good morning to you all as we kick things off in the majors, where LA Dodgers lefty Incheon went after his 5th win of the season, this time against the Cincinnati Reds. And boy, was he close to pitching a perfect game. Then the first 21 batters he faced in the game, Incheon retires all 21 batters, including 7 strikeouts. And while fans at Dodger Stadium were looking for their 2nd straight no-hitter, Todd Frazier led off the 8th inning of the game with a double, breaking the perfect game. Incheon would finish off after 7 1/3 innings, giving up 3 runs on 3 hits, but still earned his 5th win of the season as the Dodgers won the game 4-3. And moving over to football, where the South Korean national football team is set to face off against Tunisia later tonight in their tune-up match before heading over to Miami, Florida for their overseas training. Now, Tunisia might be ranked number 49 in the latest FIFA ranking, but Korea should have no problem facing off against the team. But manager Hong Myung-bo said it on Tuesday that they need to work on their defense, and defending from set pieces will be important. He added that not getting hurt before the World Cup is the most important thing, as the match is set to take place at 8 p.m. at the Seoul World Cup Stadium. And moving over to figure skating, where FS Universe, a figure skating forum site, held a survey amongst the members of the forum site to vote for the worst scoring in figure skating history. The list of some of the more controversial scoring in figure skating, 31.48% of the voters believe that Kim Yeon-ah was the victim of the worst judged score in history, referring to the controversial scoring at the 2014 Sochi Winter Games. Meanwhile, at the same time, Adelina Sotnikova was voted number 1 with the most inflated scoring in history at 25.70%. And now moving over to some Tuesday night's KBO action, the NC Dinos offense kicks it up a notch, beating the Hanwha Eagles 18-9. With the Kia Tigers holding on to beat the Tucson Bears 8-5, and the Nexen Heroes win one over the SK Wyverns 10-5. Meanwhile, let's take a look at these Samsung Lions go for their 12th straight win, this time against the LG Twins. Of course, going into the game here, we go over to the 2nd inning with a man on second. Josh Bell singles to the right side, and the LG Twins take the lead 1-0. But next play, Kim Yong-hee this time with an RBI infield single. This scores Josh Bell from 3rd, and it's 2-0. 3rd inning, more from the LG Twins. This time, Chung Sung-hoon with an RBI single to center field, and it's 3-0. But here come the Samsung Lions. 5th inning, Lee Ji-young with an RBI single to the left side, and it's 3-1. 6th inning, Choi Tae-in this time singles to the left side. Deficit cut to 3-2. 7th inning, Kim Sang-soo sac fly to left field, and we're tied 3-3 before Navarro with a clutch single to the left field. Lee Ji-young scores, and the Samsung Lions have the lead 4-3. But in the bottom of the 9th inning, men on first at 30, wild pitch, Lee Byung-gyu scores, and we're tied 4-4. Next batter, Chung Lee-yoon this time. Here he goes, singles to the right side, and that scores Paek Chang-soo, and ball game over. The LG Twins win it 5-4. And staying with the KBO, the 2014 KBO All-Star Game is all set to take place on July 18th, and the venue for the annual event is all set. And of course, the venue will take place at Gwangju this time at the brand new Champions Field, where the Kia Tigers play their home games. Now, this is the first time in 5 years that Gwangju is hosting the annual summer event, and also the 5th time that the Kia Tigers are hosting the All-Star Game. Meanwhile, the Futures League All-Star Game will take place on the 17th before the KBO teams split up for the KBO All-Star Game. And that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ. Have a great rest of the day, and see you guys again for your sports needs.
Well, a mix of sun and clouds will be featured today, along with high temperatures topping out in the lower and middle 20s. And some of the inland region, especially down south, can expect a sporadic showers during the day, which will cool things down a bit compared to yesterday. And the lingering yellow dust from yesterday will continue to sweep the peninsula in the morning hours. Now, over in Chindo, winds should be blowing at 8 to 13 meters per second, and waves should be 2.5 meters high at their highest, and the currents in the water should get faster today. With that in mind, let's take a closer look at the readings for today. The afternoon high in the capital, Daegu and Gwangju, should all rise to 28, while Busan climbs to 24. Now, for other regions, down on Jeju and Daejeon should see a high of 26 and 28, while Myeongkang tops out at 19. Well, that's all for now, but I'll be back with more updates after 10.
Okay, thank you very much, Jion. And that's all we have for now. Korea Today is coming up in half an hour's time. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.